Welcome to the Transportation Channel podcast. I'm Matthew Perry, co-founder and chief executive officer of the Transportation Channel. Our podcast will provide you with valuable insights from industry experts on a wide array of transportation-related topics. Today, our discussion centers around flying vehicles. We are joined by three Transportation Channel board members: Alan Cleland, board member for the Transportation Channel; Dick Mudge, board member for the Transportation Channel; and Alan Pisarski, advisory board member for the Transportation Channel. We have a very special guest today. His name is Chuck Martin, author of the book Flying Vehicles. Welcome, Chuck. We are privileged to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here, and I love your channel.
Thank you. Before we get started, just want to remind our viewers to go to thetransportationchannel.com to upload a video and become part of our growing community. Chuck, I'm just going to start with a few questions because once the panel gets a hold of you, I'm not going to get a word in edgewise. So I'll start off just ask you a few questions. Again, welcome. Glad to have you. Thanks for doing this. You self-identify in your bio as a futurist. Do you want to tell us exactly what that means?
Well, I tend to see where things are going technologically early for whatever reason. For example, at the beginning of the internet, before people knew about the commercial web, I wrote a book about it called The Digital Estate, and it became a New York Times bestseller a year after it came out, so it was a bit ahead of its time. And then when the mobile revolution came along and people were using their Blackberries, saying, I'm not going to move to this, what they called superphones at the time, before the iPhone came out in 2007. I wrote a book called The Third Screen. Yep. And people said, I'm not going to do stuff on a mobile phone. That's ridiculous. And we know where that went. Then when things started to get connected, smart homes, smart everything, I wrote a book called Digital Transformation 3.0. And that was a year before the IoT revolution took hold. And now I just wrote Flying Vehicles. And right now people are saying that's crazy. So that's kind of, that's every book they say that I write. And then later they say, yeah, actually it was pretty good.
So you're good at telling the future. That's good. So along those lines, what do you think the first realistic application of flying vehicles should be?
Should be or is?
Well, both.
Oh,
That's a good point.
Well, there are different kinds of flying vehicles. I mean, people tend to think it's the world of flying cars, and that's really not what it is. Although That's what draws all the buzz if you say flying car, but they're really not flying cars. There are really 3 to 4 different categories of flying vehicles. The first one, and these are actually selling this year, are in the ultralight category, and anyone in aviation knows what an ultralight is. These are basically they're pretty much unregulated now, so you can fly them in recreationally, like in fields. You can't go through controlled airspace, obviously, but you can buy these things right now, and you don't need a pilot's license. They are not certified in any way. They have weight limitations, fuel limitations. Typically, they take off and landing, so they go straight up and come straight down, so we don't need runways. And I've flown one of these actually, and I've got invites to fly several more. They're popping up all over the world, a lot in the U.S. And so that's one category. The big category that's coming are the certified or commercial vehicles, and there's a third category that's coming after that. So the commercial vehicles, the flying taxis, and those are the big companies, Archer, Joby Aviation. Well, Archer is now raised $6 billion, so they're very well funded, and all the major airlines are behind this: United Airlines, Delta Airlines, and so forth. And Brazil, and they're building them. So this is going to be integrated with the airline industry. And I can talk later about how that will actually work from a consumer standpoint. But the idea is that you would instead of taking the drive from JFK in New York into the city, which can be painful at best, it could take you an hour to an hour and a half on an Uber. You'd be making that flight in like 10 to 15 minutes. And people think, well, they're not going to fly these in New York. But they're actually converting the heliport on the east side on the river to be a vertiport. So they are actually going to be flying them in New York. and they'd be flying them in London to go from Heathrow downtown in 15 minutes. And anyone who's traveled from Heathrow knows how painful that is. So that's one category. There's another category of the acronyms fees in the book, the PAVC, Personal Aerial Vehicle Certified, and these are the flying vehicles that individuals will own. And there's some being developed down here, like Deroni and on Fort Lauderdale has one. The idea of these is it's a personal vehicle. You'll need a pilot's license for this. You'll have to be they'll be certified by the FAA, but they'll fit in a 2-car garage. They're electric, so you'd wheel it out electrically, take off from your driveway, fly to a location, say you went to a golf course. There'll be many vertiports in many places. They're going to be really common. I mean, there are hundreds of these being built around the world right now. But that's coming after the flying taxis. The flying taxis, they've flown over 20, 30,000 test miles already. And we expect they'll be certified by late 2025. So, I mean, the one of them is, two of them are certified to carry vehicles to fly now, but their vehicles are not certified. So they can fly as simulations of them essentially. But these are all, the Air Force has these. We have one here at MacDill. There's one at Eglin Air Force Base. The military's been all over this for years. And people think this is like a brand new thing. This has been developed for like 15 years. Like one person I interviewed started this 15 years ago. And he's flying it now, but 15 years. And I said, would you have done this if you thought it was going to take 15 years? He said, heavens no. But these companies, I mean, the bigger companies, they've been around 10, 15 years. It's not a new thing. It's just that it's now because of the technology, battery technology, infrastructure, power, just all these things. And all these things, by the way, have redundancy. So everything has multiple things. So if it's got 8 propellers, it's got 8 battery packs. And they don't need 8 propellers to run. They can run on fewer, or some of them have more, some have less. Anyway, those are kind of the highlights. So I'll let you guys dip in here because there's a lot to go through.
There's a lot to go through.
Hey, Chuck, is it a given that these are going to be electric, so that they're not going to be a net contribution to global warming and air quality degradation?
They're all electric so far, although there's several that are in development for being developed using hydrogen. So ultimately, they're probably going to be hydrogen, but right now they're electric because hydrogen's not ready yet.
Chuck,
okay.
I'm sorry, Alan, did you want to finish something?
No, that's good.
Okay. Chuck, what I heard you describe is quite fascinating, but it didn't seem terribly distinct from a helicopter. You didn't mention the car part of all of those transactions. I've flown from the World Trade Center when it was down to the national, the airport, LaGuardia, and it's a great way to get there. There's no question about it. But you're going to be using the heliport. Is there really in the taxi side a space for the people that you'd like to have in that vehicle? And number 2, is there really any driving a part of it?
What was the second part?
I said the first part was capacity, but the second part was, is this thing really going to be doing any driving on the streets as opposed to being up in the air? Or is it just a very attractive looking helicopter?
Yeah, I'll deal with both of those. Helicopters, first of all, you have to be flying it all the time. I don't know if anyone's had helicopter experience, but like in a plane, the pilot can do a lot of autopilot kinds of things. With the helicopter, they also typically require an enormous amount of maintenance for the amount of time flown. I mean, extraordinary maintenance. They're also really expensive. These electric vehicles, the intent is that these are going to be filling the sky. It's not going to be like a couple of helicopter rides. I'm very familiar with. I used to take that helicopter as well to JFK from the east side. I love that. Very, very efficient. Not cheap, but very efficient. But these things are going to. The idea is that you'd be getting on it, and it's all based on volume of traffic. So people going to very much like you described, the scenario is you're flying somewhere from, say, JFK. You would go to a vertiport. It would take you to JFK, but you would have checked in back at the vertiport, so that you're seamless all the way through with the airline.
Mhm.
And then when you land, you'll be able to get another flying vehicle that will take you to your location where you're going to. Uber's involved in this as well, as you might expect. So there'll be car services tied in with this as well. In terms of the car part, there are in fact cars that fly. They're certified to drive on the road, and they're being tested in flight right now. I actually wrote about one literally yesterday that's now doing tethered flight testing. With the way the process for all of these vehicles, it's pretty much the same. They first have to fly tethered, so tethered to the ground to make sure they actually can get off the ground and hover. Then they have to be flown without pilots. So 100% of these can be flown remotely. And then the next certification phase, they allow pilots to fly them. And we're now at the pilot stage for all the major players. The long range of this, by the way, is to have these things be pilotless. And there's a company in China called EHang, which I saw at a recent event I attended in Abu Dhabi. They're flying people without pilots right now, and they have been for a long time. They're the only ones certified around the world to be flying, but they fly without pilots, and there's a main control station, and they can see the location of everyone. They see if there's a problem, they can just bring it down instantly, because these things they land straight down. I mean, it's not, you don't need runways or anything. They land pretty much anywhere. The one that I flew can land and take off on water. So that was pretty cool. There's another category. Lepcar in Orlando is developing this, and this is something in XPeng in China is developing it as well. And I've seen these. It's actually two vehicles. There's a flying component and a driving component. And what happens is the flying component comes in. It hovers over the driving component. It connects to it, and then it picks it up. It flies the driving component somewhere else. Then the driving component leaves the flying component and drives away. The reason that's more effective is because you're not compromising on the flying or the driving, because then you have a vehicle that actually is certified to drive on the road. It's like a real car or truck. And they're developing these in the Philippines right now for Jutneys. So they're going to be flying these things to different locations, dropping them, and then they drive away. And when you think about this from a transportation standpoint, it becomes really effective for delivery of remote areas that you couldn't get to before. So like the FedExes, the UPSs of the world, the DHLs, they're all looking at this kind of stuff. They haven't even touched on drones yet.
So this becomes sort of like a last mile delivery option for
exactly it. Also, the first uses of these things you're going to see, even though they can move people, they're going to be moving things and doing rescue. There's one vehicle I saw in that EHang has created that I saw it at the DriftX Expo, where it flies up with, it's got a pilot, and for a high rise fire departments can only go so high. I forget how many floors. There's 20 something floors. That's it. They can't go any higher. So for a high rise, like the 30 or 40th floor, there's a fire. This thing goes up. It hovers right in front of the window. It then shoots a rocket through the window, and then it has a long tube that comes out from the bottom with fire retardant. It has a big tank underneath with fire retardant material.
Oh, my goodness.
This thing works. I mean, it's not a demo. I mean, it actually works.
That's incredible.
Well,
All this stuff is happening, and nobody knows it. Only people in the industry.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, the public at large doesn't really know about it. And, us sitting here too, I mean, we're in transportation, and I found it incredible, the advancements that are here. Dick, did you want to ask a question?
I assume the economics of this requires that it be that there not be any pilots.
Ultimately, yes, but the public's not ready for that yet. I mean, if anyone said, "Hey, here's an electric flying thing, and want you to get in, and there's got nobody driving it,"
Yes.
you'd probably say, "I won't be first in line for that." In China, of course, they can make that happen. Enough said on that. But the economics, what they're looking at for pricing, generally they're expecting the pricing is going to be the range. Say a flight from New York, JFK into the city, or Heathrow into the city. They're looking for the same price as a high-end Uber. So it's not going to be off the charts price wise.
Great.
And they all know that it has to be practical, otherwise people won't use it. They're relying on volume because they want these things to be going back and forth all the time.
That's interesting. Chuck, for the various types of flying vehicles that you'd mentioned in the beginning, like PAVs, PAVC, and CAVs, what are the distance that these vehicles can go? I mean, can we go from New York to California on one, or is it just regional?
Well, they're not going to replace airlines because airlines have a function. In New York to California, you'd still want to go at a high altitude. What people don't realize, these things, they fly at really low altitudes, only like a couple thousand feet, like 2,000-3,000 feet max. So you'll see these things sort of everywhere, but they're designed for distances that are too long to drive and too short to fly. So, like to go from here, I'm in Tampa, Florida, to Orlando. We have a road called Route 4, which is with the world's largest parking lot. It's just a painful road to drive, and if an accident happens on Route 4, you're just in traffic for a long time. So, a trip to Orlando from here can take an hour, or it can take 3 hours. By one of these vehicles, it'll take 10 to 15 minutes.
That's amazing.
And they're planning that. I mean, that's a planned route. These things, they're going to start at the vertiports, are starting at airports because that's where the infrastructure already is. But what happens is they'll fly for, say a 20-mile trip, and then they will charge for 10 to 15 minutes because they're all battery. They have to be charged all the time. So they recharge while they're reloading, and then they fly another 10 to 15-minute trip. But they're intended for relatively short trips, but they're covering relatively long distances.
Very interesting.
Chuck,
the taxi is, in many ways, is the coolest thing because I'm seeing these things. They're gorgeous vehicles.
Right.
There's one called Risk Aero, which Boeing spent $450 million and acquired it. They are starting. They're in California. They're developing vehicles. They're starting without pilots. So their plan is they're not going to ever have pilots flying these vehicles. So they won't be launching in 2025 or 2026. But by later in the decade, you're going to start to see pilotless vehicles are going to start to be used. They'll be used for other things. They'll be used for like bringing a doctor to an accident, for example, as opposed to trying to fly a patient with a helicopter to a hospital. It just becomes more efficient. Flying medical supplies to remote areas. They've been doing this by drone for years now.
That raises a question in my mind. What about the capacities we're talking about? I've seen some pictures, and they're usually 2, 3, max 4 seats.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, usually it's four people max.
If you're going to be trying to be commercially viable in terms of trips or cargo, it seems to me you're going to be able to get, for instance, a person on a stretcher in it, or a large enough capacity of freight to make it a viable trip.
Yeah. They're actually their medical devices already developed, and they're in test mode right now. They're not for things like stretchers. They're specifically for medical emergencies. And they made videos on this online as well, where it shows the speed of it getting there versus an ambulance getting to somewhere. It's just so much faster, and because it can land anywhere pretty much, the straight up and down. But down, your point is well taken. It has to be about volume. They have to be going back and forth all the time, and they all know that. And that's what all of their goal is. The other thing is once the individual things start, they're going to have larger capacity because right now it's all because of battery capacity. I mean, ultimately, once you get hydrogen, you can do hundreds of miles in these things.
Interesting.
Chuck, how viable is this? Realistic for personal ownership, as opposed to the commercial activities you've been describing?
You mean for an individual buying one?
Yeah.
The company who are making them are selling out. They have lines like literally the thousands of people who put down deposits. Many of them non-refundable deposits, and they're very large. The first people who are going to buy them have a lot of money. You have to because they're expensive, and the flying taxis start at $25 million. So, and that's if you can get a deal. But you're not going to buy a flying taxi, really.
Right.
But United Airlines can.
Yeah.
And Delta Airlines can. I mean, they're into these things for hundreds of millions of dollars already.
Right.
And that's how Archer has $6 billion. You need $6 billion to be viable in this business to get started. Once it scales, though, these things are going to be pretty much everywhere. The personal vehicle that people can buy, they're around $300,000 US right now, but those are going to come down. Those are the certified. Those are uncertified. You can buy for $95,000.
And are those flying themselves, or does the individual have to like do anything when they get in the vehicle?
In the ultralight or the certified?
The certified.
Certified, you can either type in an address and it will take you there, or you can fly it. I've actually gone to Fort Lauderdale and flown the simulator of the Droney Aerospace, which is pretty cool. You actually can, you want to land somewhere, so no, you can't land in that spot because it's whatever. It's not a fair landing place, but here you can land over here, and then you just hit a button that says land, and it lands. You don't have to go land it like a pilot.
Well, we did a podcast last week about auto taxis. Have people in this market looked at what's happened in the auto taxi business as a parallel or anything to learn from it?
Yeah, absolutely. They're actually taking all of that technology because that's been in development for a very, very long time. I've been writing about that for years. The issue with autonomous vehicles is there's a legacy infrastructure on the ground, which is really difficult to contend with. They're cars that are not connected.
Yes.
There are people that walk around. You don't know where they're going to be going. And there have been enough accidents in that to know that there's really serious issues there. In the air, there's no legacy infrastructure. There are no air roads other than those that the FAA has controlled for the airline industry. All of these things are flying lower. That's all right now available airspace. And the FAA is totally on top of this, by the way. Everybody, all these larger players, they're all working with the FAA. NASA's involved in it. They're all looking at how do we organize space roads, essentially. I contend in the future, we do a publication called Enter Quantum, about quantum business. So we're looking at quantum technology. Quantum technology can handle an infinite number of variables. And ultimately, I see that quantum having to be used for this because there are so many variables in the air that quantum technology, it can reroute the most incredibly condensed traffic in real time based on every input. So ultimately, the FAA hasn't realized this yet, but ultimately the FAA is going to have to look to quantum because quantum is coming along in a very big way. All the financial services are using it because there are all these crooks capturing encrypted data and holding the encrypted data until they can get quantum technology to decrypt the data. Meanwhile, the banks are doing the exact opposite. They're creating more encrypted data. It's just like insane.
But along those
The way
lines,
you describe it, it almost sounds like you wonder why Google and Amazon went after auto taxis. This sounds like a much better market.
Yeah, it totally is. Uber actually just today, this morning, announced they're doing a deal with Waymo, which is the Google company. Speaking of Google and Uber, that they're going to use Waymo self-driving technology for Uber vehicles. Uber initially, their original IPO, which I read at the time, said the only way they would be profitable is with driverless vehicles. Like they've never been profitable without it. But then they sold their driverless business to either Joby or Archer. I forget which one. They sold their whole self-driving business and we're getting out of it. And so one of the big air taxi companies has all that technology. But yes, the air people are taking all that technology because it works really better for them in the air than it does for people on the ground.
but along the infrastructure line, just to bring it back for air infrastructure, and this may be a really dumb question, but would air traffic control have a role to play here or no?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, this has to be integrated with the whole air control system, which it is being. And we've done simulations, we've done stuff at the Dallas airport with FAA, NASA, and the air controllers. Remember though, a lot of this is going to be automated.
Right.
All these vehicles have they have sensors and there's so much technology, it's like crazy. But they have anti-collision technology. They have technology that stops them from going into certain airspace. They have technology that stops them from going a certain height. They have I mean, when I flew one, it could only go so high and only go so far. So there's all invisible fences around me, which I was very happy to hear. They're basically invisible fences that are around these things, and they self-control. So even it starts to eliminate pilot error because there's so much technology involved. They're relatively simple when you think about it. It's batteries, propellers, and motors, and then a ton of technology.
Right.
Well, yeah.
What's your best guess?
And the big issue, I would think, is, I mean, we have a big problem with vehicle collisions and fatalities on the roads. But because of the infrastructure, we can do a lot to mitigate that. But anything flying up in the air and sharing airspace has got to be a major safety issue. And you mentioned this quantum technology. If that technology is critical for safety and to ensure safe passage, then every vehicle that's up there has to have that. Yeah.
The air controllers, or the FAA that uses it, these things have technology built in so that they have to be connected, literally connected, just like airlines are connected through the air traffic control. So air traffic control can see them all. And they're all working with the military too. I mean, this is a very big infrastructure happening. It's a whole low altitude economy, a whole chapter in the book called Low Altitude Economy. It's a whole economic situation and a whole ecosystem that's been built over the last decade.
And why now, though? Like, why? I mean, because as I think Alan Pisarski mentioned, this technology, or not the technology, but people have been trying to, flying cars have been around, the concept has been around 50, 60 years or so. And I think you mentioned that in your book as well. Why now does it seem to be coming to the forefront?
In some ways, it's coincidental. Like Joby and Archer are pretty much in the same place, but the FAA is in the same place. So everybody's sort of they're moving along all these years. Like 3 years ago, it would have been way premature to do a book on this, because it wasn't coming to market. Like now we're talking about that you can actually go buy one of these PAVs right now.
Wow.
Like you couldn't buy one a year ago. So 2024 is the year of the personal aerial vehicle. Next year is the year of the flying taxi. So that's when the public starts to see these things. They've been flown in demos all over the place, in Las Vegas, and they were shown at CES 3 years ago in Las Vegas. They were flying there, but people didn't they didn't make the connection that this might be for me. It's like, oh, look at this cool thing up in the air. Just like at CES, they have self-driving cars for years. But if anyone has driven one of these things, like some of these vehicles, they're painful because they stop at everything that they think is in the way. So you have this really jerky ride. It's just not pleasant.
Right.
But the technology is now come along with the battery technology, which is the real key in this thing. Battery technology, thanks to things like Tesla and electronic vehicles, all that stuff is being ported over to the flying industry. The ultralights can only fly like 10 or 15 minutes. Then they need to lay down and they change the batteries or charge. They typically just have a quick change out of the battery pack, essentially. The other vehicles can fly. I mean, some of them can fly up 100 miles, but they're still limited in terms of it's not going to replace an airline pretty much ever.
Right.
This sounds very much like conversations I've had maybe 15 or 20 years ago with people in the automobile business, and they talked about all sorts of wonderful things happening, and the technology is there, but no one's made a dime. What's the time frame for anybody in this business other than consultants to make a dime out of it?
It's very big dollars. It's going to be. It's probably going to be masked for a while in terms of what the profit is, because what will happen is the way. And now you remember this. The way you used to book, like I book a first class trip to Buenos Aires from New York. And for that first class trip, I paid full fare. I would get a free helicopter ride to JFK from Manhattan. Well, it wasn't free really, but it looked free. So I don't know, and I don't know how they booked it in terms of P&L. but it just got included, and that's probably the way this is going to start with the airlines, where it'll be tacked on to your flight, and all of a sudden your air flight will be a little bit more expensive than it was before. So, and how the airlines book it, I'm not sure. That's still to be determined. But they all want to make money. I mean, none of these things are charities. They're all businesses. They're building massive plants. There's a big plant being built in Georgia to manufacture these. One being in Brazil. I mean, in China. I mean, they're all over the place. It's big infrastructure. But yeah, you're right. The consultant type people, people who write books, people who do speeches on this stuff. It's basically making bullets for the revolution. But
Right, exactly.
but the model for some of these businesses, when you think about it, some of them their model is to sell the vehicles. So sell the vehicles to an airline. Others is to operate the vehicles. So they're doing lease deals. So it's a matter of where the revenue stream goes. The very smart companies of the vehicle makers, they're selling their vehicles to people like the military. The military is paying a fortune for these things, by the way. I don't know if they're overpaying, but the prices are really high. I mean, I'm talking about in the hundreds of millions that the people are paying. So it's very, very big dollars. And all the big players are in the $1 billion plus range of money that they've raised easily. I mean, you have to have $1 billion to be a flying taxi company, and they do. I mean, Archer's got $6 billion.
And the two major ones are Joby and Archer. Are there others in this space?
Oh gosh, yes. There's Lilium, which is a flying jet. Which we haven't talked about that yet. There's Volocopter in Germany. They demoed here in Tampa. They've demoed in New York.
So
the whole,
I don't know, but can you tell us about the flying jet? That sounds interesting.
Yeah, they've received a ton of money, and they have a ton of PR too. But they have a lot of deals. They have a lot of pre-sales. I mean, many hundreds of these have been pre-sold already with huge deposits. They carry, I think they might be carrying 4 to 6 passengers. It's just a different kind of technology. Some of these are the eVTOLs, EVTOL, which is one of the world's worst acronyms. It's electric vertical takeoff and landing. There are also vertical takeoff and landings that are not electric, like the Switchback flying car, for example. That is literally a flying car that's been certified to drive on roads. It can pull up to a gas station, fill up with gas from a gas station, and then drive to an airport, and then it takes off with a short runway. So that's a short runway takeoff vehicle.
Chuck, you're reminding me, Dick will remember this, I suppose. A colleague of ours, senior in the Federal Highway Administration, lived out here in Virginia, had a short takeoff and landing vehicle come and land at the parking lot near his house, fly him to Manhattan, and land on a pier in the East River. And he was dazzled, and he said he was back in the office by 9 o'clock in the morning. And of course, we all predicted a great future, kind of like, it's kind of like Bolivia has a great future and always will, And this was Lee Mertz, Dick. You remember?
Yeah. But this vehicle from Samsung Sky, it's called the Switchblade. It actually has been flying, and the person who created it, this is the person who started 15 years ago. This has been wind tussled by Boeing engineers. I mean, these are not toys. I mean, they're serious vehicles. And along the way, he got his pilot's license, figuring that, well, I probably should be flying these things since I'm inventing it. He wasn't planning to be a pilot, but now you can drive this thing, and it powers. It actually uses the power wheel, because it'll do like 150 miles an hour on land. But it uses the power of the wheels to get going. Then it uses on the airstrip, and then the propellers once it gets going. So it's usually the car power to take off.
Oh, is that right? That's fascinating.
I'd like to get back to some of the practical issues. And you talked about infrastructure-based autonomous vehicles. And, you know, we've been busy since 1999 trying to do connected vehicle deployment. We have not been successful within the transportation industry. And a part of this, a large part of this, has been disagreement over technologies to be used, and difficulties with working both US DOT and the Federal Communications Commission to get agreement. We've had 2 changes in technology, standard technology that I'm aware of, and it's just been a big barrier to deployment. What will change that when we move from ground-based infrastructure to air-based infrastructure with the agencies involved in ensuring we get agreement?
Good point about the agencies. All of these organizations, all these flying organizations, they're all working very, very closely with the FAA, with ESA, with the people in China, with the people in Saudi Arabia, UAE, because they all are kind of learning at the same time. It's not something the FAA has known about for a long time, so they know what to do. They're actually learning as the companies are learning. They're actually having to create different guidelines, essentially. But the rules, the FAA rules are really stringent for these things. Like all these stages you have to go through, and you're familiar with airlines. This is the same thing, except it's something that's brand new. So there are things that they're having to create in terms of regulation. But organizations like EASA and the FAA, they're coordinating pretty well. These things, by the way, are going gangbusters outside the U.S. I mean, like insanely. Like in United Arab Emirates, I mean, one of the sheiks have bought 100 of these things. Those ones like $410,000 each. And I mean, I went to a demo there, and they had these things flying like for 2 days, like flying all over the place. So it does happen. In China, they did a demo where they had 8 flying taxis take off at the same time, and they all flew around. They all landed together. So this is the one that flies 2 people with no pilot.
So the PAVs that people can purchase today, how far away are we from actually that happening where people can fly them and start using them?
Well, you can do it right now, but it's a different category of people. Those are either hobbyists or people who have their third Ferrari and they want something else to do the weekend. And I mean, some of these you can literally put on the back of a pickup truck, drive to a field, take it off the pickup truck, put the wings back on it, and then it goes. I mean, these are pretty much not. I shouldn't say wings, but put battery packs. They're not really winged vehicles, or most of them aren't. They're like souped up helicopter type vehicles that also go forwards and backwards, and they go sideways. And they get spread around. I think they're kind of fun. I mean, everyone who flies them says, "Wow, that was just a blast." I mean, because you're totally in control. The idea of the personal vehicle not being certified, it's because the FAA said the only responsibility is the person in the vehicle. Where the FAA and the regulators are involved is when other people can be harmed potentially by the vehicle, so there's people on the ground. So that's why the certification is so stringent. And everybody in this industry I've talked to, and I've interviewed many leaders of this industry, they all are so conscious of safety, like insanely, like everything is about safety, because they know if there's one accident, it's a disaster for the whole industry.
That's right.
And not to mention to blow their company out of the water. So everybody is very conscious of that, including all the regulators. So they're being very careful, except in China.
Chuck, you've convinced me, but then the question gets to be, if we're so successful, how do we keep them from bumping into each other?
Great question.
Well, they all have anti-collision avoidance built in. They can't really bump into each other. There's so many sensors. I mean, picture all the autonomy in cars with cameras and LiDAR and so forth. I mean, all that stuff is now exponentially moved into the air. Without all the interference. Yeah. So we don't have all these technical interferences from the ground.
So do you envision a world, Chuck, sort of like the Jetsons, where we have all these flying vehicles that are
totally, absolutely,
but they can't bump into each other?
Totally.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. And do you think how far away do you think we are from that?
Well, years for sure.
Yeah.
2025 is going to be the kind of the outcoming for the air taxi business, where people start to say, "Oh, what's that thing up there?" I mean, when these things flew in New York, there was
2025 is
a beta demo. 2025. Did I say 2024? Oh gosh, no.
2025 is a big year for,
Yeah,
for all the
I
auto.
mean 2025, not this year
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
But I mean, some of them have flown literally 20,000 miles already with a pilot,
Wow.
and they still haven't passed certification yet because there's still more certification to do. It's a very rigorous process. I mean, I'm very comfortable with the process. So is the whole industry. No one's trying to rush this to market at all.
But again, this reminds me of what I heard with all the auto taxi people 20 years ago. Is there any group or institution out there that is against this? With the auto taxis and the auto trucks, the unions are against it. Is there
Yeah,
any,
if you look at the case study in the book that I did on Volatus Infrastructure, Bob Johnson, who's one of their chief executives there, he really detailed very well the challenges. It's everybody wants to see these things fly, but the vertiport, not in my backyard. I don't want these flying in and out with all these Uber people taking people in and out of my area. I'm all fine for it in the next city, but not necessarily in my city. So that would be likely one of the issues. Another issue is where is the electrical infrastructure available to be able to do it?
Right.
In Australia, they're putting the vertiports. They're actually it's California and Australia. They're jutting out into the water, so they aren't over a community. So the thing would come in over water, essentially. That's being done in Southwest Airlines is committed to this in California for several of their airports where they fly in California. So Southwest is going to be doing this for local travel in the state.
Very interesting. Chuck, do you think eventually that this will become so prevalent, flying vehicles will become so prevalent that it may, in fact, help out with congestion in our cities?
Well, but that's the whole idea. In Japan, with the reason they're doing it is because they can't move. And in Japan, they're designing these things, and they're flying in Japan too. They're designing these to be able to go from rooftop to rooftop
Wow.
of homes, without pilots.
That's
I mean, all of these things have flown without pilots from the beginning.
yeah.
So it's not. It sounds foreign to a consumer that something would fly like but that's what they have to do before they can even put a pilot in it.
Yeah. Yeah. And
is there any concern with all the drones that are out there? I mean, lots of people I know have their own private drones flying around. Those are not controlled by the FAA. If you have one or two of those bump into one of your planes, that would seem to be bad for everybody.
Yeah, the drone technology, a whole different thing. You've got companies like Walmart. 2 days ago, they just pulled out they're delivering groceries by drone with Drone Up, and they just pulled out of here, Tampa, and 2 other states, and they're moving it all to Dallas to make it kind of the drone capital of the country. They're allowed to fly without a line of sight, so they're all flying automatically. And the way the drones are designed, like the drones from Wing, for example, which are not very big, but they carry a package. They're designed that if there's a bird, it actually avoids the bird, and if the bird is going at it, it actually takes action so the bird doesn't hit it.
Yeah.
So these things they're being designed to have avoidance technology. It's not just not hitting something; it's letting something not hit you as well. But it's a good point that the consumer drones are the real problem. They're just like Piper Cubs aren't regulated. So the same thing for pilots; they have to watch out for those things as well.
right. Exactly. And
It's easier for the technology to watch out for something than it is for people to watch out for something.
that's right. That's right. And in other countries like China, I mean, they are ahead of us in this race, or is it a race really? But I mean, is China ahead of us, or
Well, they've got many vehicles flying with people right now, but that vehicle is not likely to be certified by the FAA in any foreseeable future, just because of the way it's designed.
right?
To walk in, I've sat in it. To get to it, you have to walk through the propellers, which is kind of an iffy design. They're not spinning, of course, at the moment, but when you land, they're still spinning. If you decide to get out in a hurry, you better be careful.
Yeah.
All the others, the propellers are totally locked up. They're away. They can't get in the way of anybody.
Wonderful.
Is there synergy between the electric car industry in China and the technologies that we've been talking about, where one will support the other and vice versa?
Yeah, actually, XPeng is a spin-off of the auto company. So the auto companies are all involved. Stellantis is physically building them. The auto industry is big time on the ground. That's part of the ecosystem where you've got like Embraer is using the auto system there, and there's several like that they all have to be involved because they have the capacity.
Right.
It's really this is auto manufacturing in the air. Essentially, they're better at that than anybody, and they know how to do it.
What an incredible conversation, Chuck. Chuck Martin is our guest, and the name of the book is Flying Vehicles. I suggest everyone go out and buy it. Chuck, really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today, and we'll do a follow-up with you very soon to see the progress.
Great question, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I love the discussion.
Really
wonderful. It was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.